the hospital called him first. Not her mother. Not Amara, who had been her best friend since secondary school and knew every version of Nella Williams that had ever existed. Not her business partner, who had been blowing up her phone for 3 days about the brand relaunch. Him. Minjun Kong. The man she had signed divorce papers with 18 months ago. The man whose name she had removed from everything. The man she had promised herself was permanently behind her. Was the first person the paramedics reached when her world went dark on Gangnam-daro. And he came. That's the part that should have scared her most. But when Nello finally opened her eyes, white ceiling above her, for in her arm, the smell of antiseptic thick at the back of her throat, the first thing she saw was Minjun, sitting in the chair beside her bed. Jacket still on. Eyes steady on her face like he hadn't moved once. Like he had simply been waiting for her to come back. And for one unguarded, foolish, beautiful second, she almost let herself believe he had. Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories. In today's episode, we bring you reignited love, faded reunions, quarrels, bonds, and dark romance. If you're just joining us for the first time, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on new story drops. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far these amazing stories have traveled. Now hold on to your seats as we take a deep dive into this amazing story. Nello met Minjun Kong at an industry dinner she almost didn't attend. A mutual contact. A last-minute invitation. She had been exhausted that evening, 3 weeks into a new semester, behind on 2 projects, seriously considering her couch over a room full of strangers in expensive clothing. She went anyway. She remembers standing near the window with a glass of wine she wasn't really drinking, watching the Seoul skyline do what it always did, glow like it owned the night, when someone appeared beside her and said nothing. Just stood there, also watching. She glanced sideways. He was looking at the city the way she was. Like it was a problem he was quietly solving. "You're not eating," he said eventually, nodding toward the food she had ignored all evening. "Neither are you," she said. He looked at her then. Really looked. He was handsome in a way that felt almost architectural. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that carried something heavy he had long ago learned not to put down in public. Composed in the way of someone who had never once lost control of a room and knew it. She did not know then what he was. By the time she found out, she was already in love with him. His name carried weight in Seoul's underworld that she hadn't known existed until 3 months into their relationship, when a man approached her outside a restaurant, said Minjun's name like a warning, and disappeared before she could respond. She had gone home that night and asked him directly, the way Nello did everything. No preamble. No softening. He told her the truth. All of it. And she had sat with it for 4 days, not returning his calls, walking around Lagos in her head even though she was still in Seoul, and then she had come back. Because the man who had told her the truth without flinching, without dressing it up, without asking her to be okay with it before she was ready, that man she trusted. That was her first mistake. Not trusting him. Trusting that trust would be enough. They were electric together. That was never the problem. Nello was warm and sharp and present in a way that made every room feel more alive. Minjun was controlled and perceptive, and when he chose to soften, only ever with her, it felt like watching something rare happen in real time. But his world had walls. Thick ones. And the longer they were together, the more she understood that loving Minjun Kong meant accepting that certain doors would never open for her. Conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Nights he disappeared and returned smelling of tension she wasn't allowed to ask about. A coldness that would fall over him sometimes, sudden and total, that had nothing to do with her, but swallowed her anyway. She had not married half a man. She was not built to love half of one. The fights, when they finally came, were not loud. That was the thing about 2 people who were both too composed for screaming. The damage was always quieter and therefore deeper. It was the silences that broke her. The mornings he was already gone before she woke. The way he would look at her sometimes like he was already grieving something he hadn't lost yet. She asked him once. They were in the kitchen, late, the kind of night that felt suspended. "Do you actually want me here? Or do you just want me close enough to watch over?" He hadn't answered immediately. And in that pause, that single, too long pause, she heard everything she needed to hear. The divorce was quiet. No screaming. No theatrics. Two people sitting across a table, both of them broken in ways they didn't have the right vocabulary for, signing their names on a document that made it official. Minjun had not begged her to stay. That was the part she was still finding pieces of 18 months later. She had poured every broken piece of herself into Nello, her clothing brand. It had started as survival. Something to do with hands that no longer had him to reach for. She designed everything herself, shot her first lookbook with a ring light and Amara against her living room wall, packaged first orders on her kitchen floor at midnight. Then one packaging reel went quietly viral. Orders flooded. A restock sold out in 11 minutes. Nello was no longer just surviving. It was arriving. And it was that arrival, that hard-won momentum, that brought her back to Seoul. A fabric supplier she trusted. A sourcing deal that could transform her production quality. 3 meetings in 2 days. In and out. Clean. Purposeful. She had told Amara before boarding, I am going for the brand. Nothing else exists there for me anymore. Amara had given her the look. Nello had boarded anyway. She had not. In the chaos of restocks and supplier calls and packing, updated her emergency contact. She had thought about it once. Told herself later. Later was already waiting for her in Seoul. The rain came on her second night. Heavy and sudden, the kind that makes Seoul feel like it's being wrung out. She was driving back from her final supplier meeting, phone buzzing on the passenger seat, wipers working hard against the downpour. She reached for the phone. Just for a second. That was all it was supposed to be. 1 second, one glance, then eyes back on the road. She had done it 100 times before without consequence, and the mind has a cruel way of using that history against you, making you believe that because something hasn't gone wrong yet, it won't. The rain had other plans. The car caught the wet surface wrong. She felt it before she understood it. That terrible, suspended moment where the wheels lose their conversation with the road and suddenly nothing is responding the way it should. She grabbed the wheel with both hands. Corrected. Overcorrected. The barrier came out of the dark fast. Then nothing. No pain yet. No sound. Just a sudden, total darkness that swallowed everything. The rain, the phone, the buzzing notifications, the supplier meeting she had just left, the brand, the restocks, the carefully constructed life she had built on the other side of heartbreak. All of it gone. Just dark. And quiet. And nothing. His phone rang at 11:52 p.m. Minjun Kong was in the back of his car, moving through Seoul's rain-slicked streets after a meeting that had run 3 hours longer than it should have. His lieutenant Suhan was in the passenger seat. 2 other men behind them. He almost didn't look at the screen. Something made him look. He didn't recognize the number. Hospital prefix. He knew those, had received enough of them over the years to feel his chest tighten before he even answered. Mr. Kong, we have Are you the emergency contact for Nello Williams? The name hit him somewhere he had spent 18 months trying to armor. He sat up slowly. Yes. She's been in a road accident on Gangnam-daro. She's been brought to Seoul National University Hospital. She's stable but... He was already moving. Turn around, he said to the driver. Quietly. Suhan turned to look at him, read his face, turned back around, and said nothing. The drive took 11 minutes. Minjun did not speak for any of them. He sat with his phone in his hand, screen dark, and stared at the rain streaking the window, and did not let himself think about what stable but meant, did not let himself calculate the gap between stable and the other thing, did not let himself go to the place his mind was trying to drag him. He had trained himself out of panic a long time ago. In his world, panic was the most expensive thing a man could afford. It cost clarity. It cost control. It cost lives. But this was Nello. And the 11 minutes felt like something he aged through rather than survived. He walked into that hospital the way he walked into every. The staff didn't question him. They rarely did. He was taken to her ward by a nurse who seemed to understand instinctively that this was not a man who waited in lobbies. He stood at the door of her room for a moment before he entered. She was unconscious, smaller looking than she ever did when she was awake, and moving through the world with that particular energy she carried. Her left wrist bandaged, a cut above her right brow, the foreline, the monitors doing their quiet, rhythmic work. Something moved through his chest that he didn't have the right word for. He pulled the chair beside her bed, sat down, jacket still on.
And he waited.
That was all he did for 3 hours. He didn't make calls, didn't check his phone, didn't send anyone away who came to check vitals or adjust monitors. He just sat in that chair with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on her face, and he waited for her to come back. Because she had to. That was not something he was willing to negotiate with the universe about. At 2:34 a.m. her eyes opened. Slowly. Then all at once, like consciousness arrived in waves rather than all at once. He had watched it 1,000 mornings in another life. He hadn't realized until this moment how much he had missed it. She stared at the ceiling first. Then her eyes found him. He watched her process it.
The where, the why, the how.
And then, the specific, complicated expression that crossed her face when she landed on the answer. He kept his face still. Kept everything still. "You look terrible," he said. Because if he had said what he actually wanted to say, what had been sitting in his chest for 3 hours in that chair, this would become something neither of them was ready for. "You're not supposed to be here," she replied. "Your emergency contact says otherwise." "I'm surprised you hadn't changed that." She rolled her eyes. He watched her do it. Watched her gather herself the way she always had. That internal collecting, that quiet reaching for composure. He had always loved that about her. That refusal to fall apart in front of anyone, including him. Especially him. "You can go." "I'm fine." He looked at her bandaged wrist. Her taped ribs. The cut above her brow that someone had cleaned, but that was still angry and red. "I'll go. When you can walk out of here on your own," he said while settling back into the chair. She didn't argue. That told him more than anything she could have said. The room was small and quiet, and outside the rain had not stopped. Seoul kept moving the way it always did, indifferent to the small, enormous things happening inside its buildings. Minjun sat in that chair and looked at the woman he had never fully stopped loving and understood, with a clarity that was almost inconvenient. That 18 months and a signed document had not done what they were supposed to do. Not even close. He was going to need to be careful. She was going to fight this. Every step, every moment. She was going to remind them both of all the reasons this was a bad idea, and she would not be wrong. His world had not changed. The walls had not come down. The door she had once stood outside of still had the same locks. But she was here, breathing, alive. 3 hours ago, those monitors could have been telling a very different story. He looked at her, eyes closed now, somewhere between sleep and exhaustion, and made himself a quiet, private promise. He would be careful. He would be patient. He had been many things in his life. Ruthless, calculating,
Feared.
But for Nello Williams, he had always been willing to be something else entirely. He just had to remind her of that without losing her in the process. Outside, the rain finally began to slow. She was discharged on the 3rd day. Minjun had arranged everything. She hadn't asked him to. She had woken up on the 2nd morning with a plan: call Amara, sort the insurance, contact the hotel, handle it herself the way she handled everything. She had reached for her phone and found that the hotel had already extended her stay. Her damaged rental car already reported and replaced. A private doctor arranged for follow-up care. Everything sorted with quiet efficiency. She had stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she had called him. "You didn't have to do that," she said when he picked up. "I know," he replied. "And nothing else." She hated that she didn't hate it. Amara arrived on the 2nd day like a force of nature in a yellow coat, bursting through the hospital room door with 2 carry-on bags, jollof rice in a container that had somehow survived the flight, and an energy that immediately made the room feel both warmer and more complicated. She hugged Nello for a long time without speaking. Then she pulled back, looked at her, really looked, and cupped her face in both hands. "You scared me," Amara said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just," she exhaled. "Don't do that again." Nello nodded. Amara stayed for an hour before Minjun appeared in the doorway. He knocked once, a courtesy that surprised Nello, because Minjun Kong did not typically ask permission to enter spaces. He stepped in, nodded at Amara with that composed politeness he deployed like a tool, and set a paper bag on the bedside table. "From the place on Insadong," he said to Nello. "You used to like the porridge." The sentence landed softly. Too softly. Amara looked at the bag. Looked at Minjun, looked at Nello. Her expression was completely neutral in the particular way that meant she was storing everything for a conversation she was absolutely going to have later. "I'll get some water," Amara said, and left the room with suspicious speed. The door clicked shut behind her. Silence.
Nello looked at the bag.
"You remembered that." "I remember everything," he said simply. She looked up at him then. And there it was, that thing that had always lived between them, that particular current that had never needed much to conduct itself. 18 months.
A divorce.
An ocean between them for most of it. Still there. Unchanged. Unfair. Minjun. She said his name carefully, like she was handling something she knew could cut her. "What is this? What are you doing?" He was quiet for a moment. He pulled the chair close, not far, not the polite distance of someone maintaining boundaries, and sat down. Leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, eyes on hers. "I'm not doing anything. I'm just here." "That's not nothing. You know that's not nothing." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She exhaled slowly. "We signed papers." "I know what we signed." "Then you know this." She gestured at the space between them. "Is not a good idea." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, with that devastating restraint of his, "You almost didn't wake up." 3 seconds of silence. "I know," she replied softly. "And the first thing I thought," he stopped, pressed his jaw together, started again. "The first thing I thought when that phone rang was not about the papers." She said nothing, because what was there to say to that? She looked down at her bandaged wrist, thought about the 3 hours he had apparently sat in that chair before she opened her eyes, thought about the hotel, the car, the porridge from the place on Insadong that she had mentioned exactly once, 2 years into their marriage, on a cold afternoon when they had walked through the neighborhood, and she had said, almost to herself, "That smells incredible." He had remembered. He always remembered. That had always been the impossible thing about loving Minjun Kong. It was never that he didn't care. It was never that she didn't matter. The love had never been the problem. His world had been the problem. The walls. The locked doors. The life he couldn't fully share with her without pulling her into danger she hadn't signed up for. "You haven't changed," she said. Not as an accusation. Almost as a question. He held her gaze. "Some things have." "Like what?" He reached across slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and with the back of 2 fingers, gently brushed the hair from her face, careful of the cut above her brow. His touch so light it was almost a question.
She didn't pull away.
"She should have pulled away." "Like what I'm willing to lose," he said quietly, "to keep what matters." Her heart did something she immediately filed under things we are not discussing. The door opened. Amara returned with her water, took one look at the two of them, and sat down with the focused nonchalance of someone pretending they hadn't timed that re-entry perfectly. Nello was discharged on a gray Thursday morning. Minjun drove her to the hotel himself. She hadn't agreed to it exactly. It had simply happened. She sat in the passenger seat of his car, black, expensive, smelling of leather and cedarwood, and looked out at Seoul moving past the window and tried to feel like a woman who had her emotions firmly under control. She did not entirely succeed. "I have meetings tomorrow," she said. "For the brand." "I know." She looked at him. "How do you know?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Minjun." "How do you know my schedule?" she repeated. "I know the supplier you're meeting," he said simply. "Park Jae-won. I've done business with him." She stared. "For how long?" "Long enough." "That's not an answer." He glanced at her sideways. "Brief. Measured. He's reliable. Good quality. You made a good choice." She turned back to the window. Processed this quietly. The idea that her carefully researched, independently sourced, proudly chosen fabric supplier was somehow already inside the orbit of Minjun Kang's world. It should have felt like an intrusion. Like his shadow reaching into the life she had built specifically outside of his. Instead, for one irrational second, it felt like something else. Like even the parts of her life she had built in his absence had somehow kept a thread back to him. She did not say that out loud. The car stopped outside her hotel. He got out before she could reach the door handle, opened it, offered his hand. She took it only because her ribs made independent exits complicated, and not for any other reason whatsoever. She stood on the pavement, and they were close. closer than 18 months of divorce and careful distance should have allowed.
Thank you, she said.
For the hospital. For all of it. He looked at her steadily. Don't thank me for that, Minjun. Have dinner with me. She blinked. Tonight. Just dinner. You need to eat properly. The hospital food was. I'm not having dinner with you. Your ribs are cracked, he said calmly. Your wrist is fractured. You're alone in a city that almost killed you 3 days ago, and your best friend flies home tomorrow. Have dinner with me. She stared at him. He waited. Patiently. She was caught at a crossroads whether to accept this and let all of 8 months dissolve or reject and act like all of this never happened. One dinner, she said finally. That's it. Something moved in his eyes. Brief and warm and gone before she could name it. One dinner, he agreed. She turned and walked into the hotel before her face could betray her entirely. Behind her, she was almost certain she heard him exhale. Hey, before we go any further, let's hear from you in the comments. Did you think Nello should have said yes to that dinner? And do you think Minjun has actually changed? Or is this just him pulling her back into something she already fought her way out of? Was this just him getting a nostalgia for what he missed, or was he truly and genuinely concerned for he? Drop your thoughts below. And if you're watching from outside Nigeria or Korea, tell us where you're from. These stories are traveling, and we want to know how far. Now, let's get back.
Anne.
The restaurant was not what she expected. She had prepared herself for something overwhelming. Something that announced itself. Minjun had always had access to the kind of places that made you feel underdressed regardless of what you were wearing, private rooms and establishments that didn't have menus because the chef already knew what you wanted before you sat down. Instead, he took her somewhere small, tucked into a quiet street in Buckshin, the kind of neighborhood that felt like soul exhaling. Warm light through the windows. 8 tables. The smell of doenjang jjigae and something grilling slowly in the back. The owner, an older woman with kind eyes, greeted Minjun with the familiarity of someone who had fed him many times before. Nello looked around, looked at him. You used to say the big places felt like performance, he said, pulling out her chair. You said you couldn't taste food properly when you were also being watched.
She remembered saying that.
4th month of their relationship. A dinner she had felt too self-conscious to enjoy. He had filed it away. 3 years later, still there. She sat down and told herself this meant nothing. They ordered. The owner brought tea without being asked and disappeared with a small smile. Outside, the street was quiet, a few people moving through the Buckshin lanes, the city at a gentler volume than it usually managed. Tell me about the brand, he said. She looked up from her tea. Why? Because you built it. And it's working. And I want to hear you talk about it. There was nothing complicated in his voice when he said it. No agenda she could identify. Just attention. The specific, focused kind he had always been capable of, that had always made her feel like the most interesting person in any room. She told herself not to fall for it. Then she started talking. And once she started, she couldn't quite stop. The sourcing strategy, the viral moment, the restock that crashed her website, the DMs from women across Lagos and Accra and London and Atlanta who had written to tell her what wearing something with her label had made them feel. She talked about the next collection, the one she had been designing in her head for months, the fabrics she had come to Seoul specifically to find. She was 3 minutes in before she realized she was leaning forward. Minjun was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face in a very long time. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Keep going. You're looking at me like that. Like what? She pressed her lips together, looked back at her food. Like that, he said quietly, almost to himself. Like he was answering a question she hadn't asked. She let it go, because following that thread led somewhere she had made promises about. They ate. The food was extraordinary in the unhurried way of places that didn't need to prove anything. They talked, carefully at first, then less carefully, the way it had always happened between them, that gradual dissolving of the careful. She forgot twice to maintain the emotional distance she had arrived with. She remembered both times just slightly too late. It was over the second cup of tea that he said it. I should have fought for you. She went still. When you left. His voice was even, controlled, but she knew him well enough to hear what was underneath it. I should have fought. I didn't. And I've thought about that. He paused, the briefest pause. More than you probably want to know. She set her cup down carefully. Minjun. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I just needed you to know that. That I know what I didn't do. That I've known for a long time. She looked at him across the table. This man who had never once, in 3 years of marriage, admitted to a mistake without it costing him something enormous internally. Who processed everything inward and privately, and rarely let her see the working. He was letting her see the working. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because 3 days ago, I sat in a hospital chair for 3 hours not knowing if you were going to open your eyes. Something moved across his face. Brief and unguarded. Gone in a second. And I decided I was done carrying things I should have said. The restaurant was quiet around them. The older woman had disappeared into the back. Outside, 2 people walked past the window laughing at something. Nello looked at her hands on the table. There was a version of this moment where she said something careful. Something that protected her. Something that acknowledged what he had said without opening any doors. She had that response ready. She had been carrying it as insurance since she woke up in that hospital room. You didn't fight, she said quietly. And I spent 4 months waiting for you to. 4 months after I left, Minjun. I kept thinking, she stopped. Exhaled. I kept thinking you would come. The words sat on the table between them, like something delicate. I know, he said.
Low.
The weight of it in just those 2 words. I eventually stopped waiting, she said. And I built something. And it's mine. Completely mine. And I am proud of it in a way I couldn't have been if I'd stayed. I know that too. So you need to understand, she looked at him directly, that I am not the same woman who left. And whatever this is, she gestured at the restaurant, the tea, the evening, can't be what it was. He held her gaze. I'm not asking for what it was. Then what are you asking for? He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone choosing their words like they understand the weight of each one. A chance, he said, to show you what it could be instead. She looked at him for a long time. This was the moment. She could feel it. The precise point at which a decision was either made or deferred, and deferring, she knew from experience, was just deciding slowly with more damage along the way. He was the same. That was the truth she had been sitting with since she opened her eyes in that hospital room. The same composed, infuriating, devastatingly attentive man she had fallen for in a room full of strangers while pretending to drink wine. But there was something different too. Something that hadn't been there before. A kind of openness in the way he was sitting with her tonight, something put down that he had always before refused to put down. She didn't fully trust it yet. She also couldn't fully dismiss it. I'm here for 4 more days, she said carefully. He nodded once. I have meetings, and I am here for my brand. That doesn't change.
It shouldn't, he said.
And I'm not, she paused. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking for promises. She picked up her tea, looked at him over the rim of it. 1 day at a time. Something in his eyes shifted. Warm and quiet and entirely too much. 1 day at a time, he agreed. Outside, Seoul had settled into its late evening register. That particular hour when the city softened slightly, when the light turned amber, and the noise dropped to something almost gentle. Nello sat in that small restaurant in Bukshan with a man she had divorced and the feelings she had apparently not divorced at all, and understood that she was in a significant amount of trouble. The beautiful, terrifying kind. The kind she had only ever been in once before. Across the table, Minjun refilled her tea without being asked, the way he always had, because he always noticed before she did, and she watched his hands and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. She thought about the walls, the locked doors, the things his world had taken from their marriage. Then she thought about 3 hours, a chair, a hospital room, a man who had not moved until she opened her eyes. She was going to need to be very, very careful. She already knew she was going to fail at that completely. The next 4 days moved the way dangerous things always do. Slowly enough to feel safe. Fast enough that by the time you noticed the current, you were already in deep water. Nello had her meetings. She showed up to every one of them, fractured wrist, taped ribs, full professional composure, and negotiated fabric terms with the focused precision of a woman who had not spent the previous evening sitting across a candlelit table in Bukshan feeling things she had promised herself she was done feeling. She was good at that. Compartmentalizing. Always had been. Minjun did not crowd her. That was the thing that undid her more than anything else could have. He didn't hover, didn't appear uninvited, didn't flood her phone with messages the way a man trying to reclaim something might. He gave her space with the particular confidence of someone who understood that pressure was the wrong currency for what he was trying to rebuild. He texted once in the morning,
Brief. Checking that she was okay.
not waiting for lengthy replies. He sent food to her hotel room the afternoon her longest meeting ran over from the incident place again, with a single message that said, "Only you haven't eaten." She sat on the hotel bed with a container in her lap and stared at the wall and had a very firm conversation with herself that achieved absolutely nothing. Amara called from Lagos on the third day. "How are the meetings?" Amara asked. "Productive," Nello said. The silk supplier confirmed. "The new cotton blend is better than I expected. I think the next collection is going to be." Nello.
What?
"How is Minjun?" Silence. She stopped. Started again. "He's been respectful. He's given me space." "He's not." "Are you falling back?" Amara asked. Gentle. No judgment in it. Just the directness of someone who loved her enough to ask the thing no one else would. Nello looked at the ceiling. "I don't know," she said honestly. Amara was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you remember what you told me the week after you signed the papers? You called me at 2 a.m. and you said, 'Amara, the problem was never that he didn't love me. The problem was that loving me wasn't enough to make him choose me over that life.'" The words landed exactly where Amara intended them to. "I remember," Nello said quietly. "Has that changed?" She didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer was complicated in a way that 2 a.m. phone calls to best friends didn't always have room for. "He says some things have," she said finally. "Men who love you always believe they've changed," Amara said carefully. "The question is whether the things that actually hurt you have." She sat with that long after the call ended. He picked her up on her last evening without it being arranged. She came downstairs to find him in the hotel lobby, standing slightly apart from everything the way he always did, like rooms organized themselves around him without his input. He was in a dark coat. No tie. The most undone she had seen him look since the hospital. He had someone with him. A man she didn't recognize. Older. Sharp eyes. The particular posture of someone who existed in Minjun's world and had for a long time. They were mid-conversation when she stepped out of the elevator, something that stopped the moment Minjun saw her. He said 2 words to the man. The man nodded once and left without looking at her. Minjun crossed the lobby.
Who was that? She asked.
"Someone I was handling something with." "What something?" He looked at her steadily. "Business." There it was. That word. That single word that had lived at the center of everything that had broken them. Business. The door that never opened. The answer that was never an answer. The wall she had spent 3 years pressing her hands against until she finally understood it was load-bearing, that removing it would bring the whole structure down. She felt something cool move through her chest. "I have to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer me honestly. Not carefully. Not the version that protects me from the parts you think I can't handle. Honestly." He nodded once. "Has anything actually changed?" she asked. "Not how you feel about me. Not your intentions. The actual thing, Minjun. The life. The world you live in. The doors I was never allowed through. Has any of that changed?" He held her gaze for a long moment. And then he did something she had not seen him do before. Not once in 3 years of marriage. Not in any of the difficult conversations they had ever had. His jaw shifted. Something moved through his eyes that looked almost like pain. "Not enough," he said quietly. "Not yet." The honesty of it hit her harder than a lie would have. "But I'm working on it," he said. "That's new. I wasn't working on it before. I was maintaining it, protecting it. I told myself it was necessary and permanent, and that anyone who loved me would have to accept it. I told myself that about you." A pause. "I know what that cost you." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to come back to what was," he said. "I'm telling you that I am, for the first time, actively dismantling things. It's slow. It's not finished. I can't promise you a timeline, but I need you to know what's happening." "Why?" she asked. "Why now? Why after the papers, after 18 months? "Because I thought I could do it without you," he said simply. "I thought if you were gone, the thing that was keeping me from changing was gone too. That it would be easier." He exhaled, slow, controlled. It wasn't easier. It was just emptier. The lobby was quiet around them. Somewhere behind her the elevator opened and closed for someone else. You should have told me you were working on it, she said softly. Before I left. If you had just... I know. One conversation, Min-jun. That's all I needed.
To know you saw it.
To know you wanted something different. I know, he said again. Lower this time. Like each repetition cost him something. She looked at him. This man who had once been the most impenetrable thing in her world, and who was standing in a hotel lobby on a quiet Thursday evening holding nothing back, and felt the full, complicated weight of what they were. Not what they had been. What they still were. Because that was the thing nobody told you about loving someone with this much force, that it didn't have a clean-off switch. That divorce papers ended a marriage, and not a feeling. That you could build a whole new life, a thriving, beautiful, independent life, and still have this specific person living in the part of you that the construction never quite reached. I fly home tomorrow, she said. I know. My brand needs me. The next collection is. I know, Nello. She looked at him. I'm not moving back to Seoul. I'm not asking you to. And I'm not putting my life on hold for a timeline you can't give me. You shouldn't, he said firmly. Like he meant it. Like the version of him that would have once, even subconsciously, expected her to wait had been genuinely replaced by this one. So, what are you asking for? She said. Honestly. He took one step closer. Slow enough that she could have stepped back. She didn't. I'm asking, he said quietly, to not lose you again. I'm asking for the chance to show you, slowly, on your terms, around your life, that I am becoming someone worthy of what you would be choosing. He paused. I'm asking you not to close the door. She looked up at him. He was close enough now that she could see the thing in his eyes he had stopped trying to hide, that particular look she had first seen across a dinner party years ago, the one that had made her stomach do something without permission. It had never left his eyes. Not really. It had just been buried under control and walls and a life too complicated for its own love story. She reached up slowly and placed it flat against his chest. She felt him go still. I'm not closing the door, she said softly. Something moved across his face. Profound and quiet, and entirely his. He brought his hand up and covered hers. Gently. Just held it there against his chest. They stood like that for a moment, in the lobby of a Seoul hotel on the last night of a trip that had started with rain and a barrier and a name still saved in a phone, and let it be what it was. Not a reunion. Not a resolution. Something more delicate than both. A beginning that knew how much it had to prove. She flew home the next morning. Nello's new collection launched 6 weeks later. The finest fabric she had ever worked with, sourced from Seoul, cut by her own hands, worn by women who had no idea that every piece carried the weight of a woman who had walked through fire and come back with something beautiful. The collection sold out in 40 minutes. Amara screamed. Nello cried quietly at her kitchen table and then immediately started packing the next round of orders. Min-jun sent one message. I saw. I told you. She smiled at her phone for longer than she intended. And somewhere in Seoul, in a penthouse above a city that bowed to one man, the most feared name in the underworld was, slowly, deliberately, at a cost only he fully understood, taking apart the walls that had once cost him the only thing that had ever made them feel unnecessary. He was not finished, but he had started. And for now, for both of them, that was enough. Some love stories and cleanly. 2 people. A decision. A door that closes and stays closed. This was never that kind of story. This was the kind that lives in emergency contacts left unchanged and parking lots in the rain and porridge from a place on Insadong, and a man who sat in a hospital chair for 3 hours because the alternative was unthinkable. The kind of love that doesn't ask for permission and doesn't respond well to paperwork. The kind that, when it comes back asking you to be braver than you were the first time. Nello Williams was many things. A builder. A survivor. A woman who had turned heartbreak into a brand that was taking over the internet one sold-out restock at a time. But sitting at her kitchen table that night, Min-jun's message glowing on her screen, she was also something simpler. She was a woman who had not closed the door. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is exactly enough to change everything. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think Nello is making the right decision by leaving that door open, or is she walking back into the same fire with better lighting? And if you were in her position, a thriving new life, a brand finally taking off, an ex who admits he hasn't fully changed but is trying, would you give him the chance? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode. These stories are just getting started, and trust us, you do not want to miss what's coming next.